about how the finance minister, let's say, the industry minister has it wrong, and some other members that I've heard speak here tonight have it wrong. They've talked about economic growth. They've talked about their last two budgets, their plan for the economy, and how it's working so well, and they have this terrific economic growth. Well, one thing we would agree on, the economy is growing. Where we would disagree on is why that economy is growing. In a $2 trillion economy, the budget that they've put forward, and so heavily backloaded budget, has not moved the dial at all. What has moved the dial for the Canadian economy is a strong U.S. economy, a low Canadian dollar, and strong consumer spending, basically around the housing industry, and by and large completely financed by debt. If you read any economic publication about economic growth, you'll see no mention of the Prime Minister. You'll see no mention of the Finance Minister's plan. You'll definitely not see anything about the Liberal Party of Canada. Those are the facts. And so we're lucky. We're lucky. We all root for a good economy, but we have to be realistic about why we have strong economic growth. A few other points that I would like to make just to lay some context. In spite of that strong economic growth, the numbers have been revised since where they were before. They were pegged around an annualized rate at 4.1, which is way up from a couple years ago and certainly since last year. But they've been revised down to 3.7 annualized. Other troubling possible pieces in these economic numbers are inventories being backloaded, which they are currently. Exports to the United States have slipped mildly. And so the annualized rate now, which everybody is projecting realistically, is going to be 2.2%, which is not surprisingly behind the United States in economic growth. So everybody in this room should know that when the U.S. economy goes well, we do well. When the U.S. economy goes bad, we don't do so well. 75% of our exports go to the United States, so it's no surprise. Exports to the United States are up, we're up 5.4% in April, and we'll see where it goes for the rest of the year. Another troubling fact that I think all parliamentarians should have, and Canadians at a broader sense should have, if we compare the deficits that we experienced in 2009, 2010, 2011, say for example, it was in the midst of the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. The deficits that we have and the debt that we're going to be accumulating over the next 4 years for sure to 2019, but if the Liberals somehow manage to get re-elected in 2019, which is looking more doubtful every day, we're trending towards 2055 for deficit and debt. But all the while, my point is, the deficits that we're adding today are at a time of economic growth, at a time where the economy is actually moving well in the U.S., it's moving well here, a little less well with the other G7 countries, but it's not so bad. Compare that to the times of 09, 10, and 11, it was terrible times. So it's never a good idea to accumulate debt while times are good. It's never a good idea to accumulate debt at any time. Now, I'm from Ontario, and we have another big problem in Ontario, and her first name's Kathleen, and we have some problems. We have a lot of instability with some of her policies she's put forward. Her cousin Dalton had caused us a lot of trouble too, and so you have 13 years of provincial government in the province of Ontario. They've accumulated more debt than all the other provincial governments combined. They might get out of deficit at some point in time, but they've sold the furniture to pay off the short-term financial issues. We have electricity rates that are absolutely ridiculous, that businesses can't afford, seniors with fixed income can't afford, low-income Ontario can't afford. So in the province that I live in, we have the same leadership with Gerald Butts and Katie Telford guiding the ship of the Prime Minister, straight in the same direction that the province of Ontario has been going the last 13 years. The only thing that is saving us at this point in time is the U.S. economy. So we're thankful for their strength and that they continue to buy our products and that our dollar is low relative to theirs. The other thing I'll mention, I know the industry minister talks at great lengths about his super clusters and all the other stuff that he's doing, but it hasn't moved the needle. What are the three provinces that are going to show the best growth and the best strength for our Canadian economy? It's the three western provinces, and it's basically led by the oil and gas sector. So as much and all as the Liberal government uses oil and gas as two dirty words they don't like to use, the reality of it is that our economy is still very successful with it. And like I hear, and we hear many of our colleagues, it is the most ethically produced oil and gas in the world. I know other members have talked about the issues with companies like Procter & Gamble in Ontario that announced they're going to be leaving. That's 500 good-paying jobs in a small city of 30,000. That's a devastating blow at a time where the U.S. is reducing taxes. They're going to reduce taxes. They're cutting regulations. They have a number of infrastructure announcements out this week that are really laying the foundation for their growth. Contrast that to what we're doing here. We're adding taxes. We heard about the excise taxes. We're adding other levies, fees. We're revisiting the Environmental Assessment Act. I heard today the Transport Minister talking about the Navigable Waters Act. These are all things to slow progress. These are all things to slow growth. And if the Liberals are in government long enough, we'll be once again doing environmental assessments on cedar benches in national parks, which is what we were doing before we made those changes. In addition to this, I know this has been brought up already, but if I heard it once in the last election, I must have heard it 500 times about how the Liberals will never do omnibus bills. Not us, if we ever get in. And this bill, C-44 that we're looking at, it's as prolific as any omnibus bill. I'm sure at a political science course anywhere across this country, if you wanted to have a good look at what an omnibus bill is, they need look no further than this. I know that the House leaders talked about and said, well, everything in this is money. Everything in this is money. Well, I guess at the end of the day, everything is about money, but I don't think that's what they were talking about in the last election. Another topic that we have heard a lot about in the House of Commons, and that is really what I feel a continuation of the anti-rural policies that Liberal have, is the investment bank. The overall arching suite of infrastructure is $181 billion over the next 11 years. The slap in the face to rural Canadians, which I am, is that only $2 billion over 11 years is specifically allocated to rural Canada. And by and large, the $35 billion infrastructure bank, it's pretty much a given that not a dollar of that will go to rural Canadian towns and municipalities. The other thing that Canadians should be concerned about in the wording with the infrastructure bank, and I apologize if somebody else has brought this up today, is that the investments may be made in Canada or partly in Canada, is what they are saying. And so basically means that our Canadian tax dollars, which should be going into building infrastructure in this country, can actually go to build the infrastructure in China, in India, and many other places. And I don't think that's what Canadians view as an infrastructure bank when they're looking and talking about that. In addition to that, other parts in the briefing that was presented help bear a significant portion of the risk, and the bank could take on debt that allows other debtors to be paid first in order to provide a loss buffer. Those are not words you want to hear if you're a Canadian taxpayer, and it's not a word you want to hear, especially when the Liberal cabinet are the ones that are going to be picking the projects. So, Madam Speaker, I don't know if my time is up or it's close to being up. Yes, it is done. I have many more pages to go over here, so hopefully the Liberals will ask questions that pertain to what I had rest of my speech. Thank you for the time.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to discuss another aspect that tends to increase fees for Canadians. That is the Service Fees Act that replaces a similar act, but this time the act would mean that fees charged by the government to Canadians for various services, there's a whole panoply of them. In committee, we learned there could be over 1,000 services associated with fees, including immigration fees, passport fees, Pax Canada, and so on. And these fees, according to this act, will increase in tune with inflation, and this would be indefinite. Could my colleague comment on that part of the bill? He talked about many types of increases in fees and taxes, but this is a new way to increase fees every year indefinitely, and this would be linked to the Consumer Price Index.
Well, this is coming right out of the Gerald Butts, Katie Telford playbook. They nickel and dime you to death. We've seen that in Ontario, and now we're going to see it here. Passports. Low-income Canadians love to have a passport. Maybe they can go on a little trip, especially where I'm from. You can go over to Port Huron or into Ohio for a little visit if you like. Passport fees, if they're going to go up, it sure does add a lot to a fixed income, especially a fixed income senior. Another one I'd like to talk about is on the agriculture and the agri-food side. Agriculture and agri-food are the biggest driver in the province of Ontario, and the CFIA, they make it difficult enough for small butcher shops and abattoirs to stay open, feed mills and other things. Anything that we can do to reduce costs to them, any fees that are associated, we shouldn't be looking to increase, it should be decreased. Same thing other members have talked about with excise taxes. It's so bizarre to hear the finance minister stand in the House of Commons and say we need to continue to raise taxes so businesses understand, or whatever he said today in question period. I can't believe it. It should be reducing taxes.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for an excellent speech because he puts it into perspective for everyday, ordinary Canadians. So I'd like to ask him about competitiveness, because he talked about the agri-food business. I come from Oshawa, where it's manufacturing. The reality is, when you're looking at this budget, what is in this budget to help us be more competitive? He talked about the Ontario government, how they put in, well, we got the highest electrical rates in North America for industry. We got this government putting in carbon tax, not only at the provincial level, but if it's not big enough, they're going to make it even bigger. And now with the new administration in the States actually working on lowering taxes and lowering red tape, and in Canada they're doing everything to raise taxes and raise red tape. Could he talk about the importance of what should be in this budget to help Canadian competitiveness?
The honourable member for Huron-Bruce.
Well, first and foremost, it should be certainty and common sense, and the finance minister and the prime minister are definitely lacking in both areas. But we need to reduce taxes. We need to continue on that path that our government had for 10 years, reduce regulations so that businesses can compete. They can compete in North America against Mexico and the United States, which this Prime Minister is making it more difficult to do each and every day, but compete around the world. And every time the Finance Minister starts to talk and continues on his ways, it's how can I pick your pocket once? How can I pick your pocket twice? And then the very last thing, I'm going to raise your taxes. And it's tough because it affects businesses, it affects fixed income seniors across the board. And you only need to go into my area or other members and just ask people what they think. And they'll tell you pretty quick. They'll tell you what they think about Kathleen Wynne, and they'll tell you really quick about the Prime Minister. And you didn't hear that 2 years ago. You did not hear that prior to October 2015. You didn't hear that 18 months ago, 16 months ago. But now when you come home on the weekend or you're there on a break week, that's what you hear. I cannot believe what these guys are doing to us in Ottawa. What can you do? There you go. There's 2 years with Liberals.